being an entrepreneur is a very lonely journey, and it's a very difficult journey. To compound on that, if you think of an entrepreneur running a business, it's almost like having a child. And I usually don't like these analogies, but this one I believe is quite, it can at least deliver that message.
There is an accuracy in that.
Yeah. So
they ask most of my entrepreneur friends who start a business, and I was just sitting with one yesterday, and we were talking about exit, and to him, exit's not even on his radar. And I was like, why would you do that? It's like, this is my baby. I mean, you hear this word, my baby, all the time, right?
Yeah. There's a very strong emotional attachment, but you can say there's a very strong commitment, because the business is very dependent on the entrepreneur, especially in the early stage. And the entrepreneur, a lot of the times, is all in. So it's something that they put so much effort into, and it just becomes part of their life. They spend so much time, and they sacrifice so many things to make it succeed. So if we go back to the idea, let's say the entrepreneur has the business, you can think of the business almost like a child. And if you have children, you'll know that when they're first born, your job as a parent is mostly to keep them alive. They're crying. You don't know why they're crying. Are they sleepy? Are they hungry? Do they have a digestion problem? Are they just annoyed by the noise? You just have to kind of try to figure things out. When they become teenagers, or when they grow a little bit older, then they're relatively self-dependent, but there's a lot of change. So the way that you work with your children or with the company has to adapt. You can't really treat a 14-year-old child the same way that you treat a 2-year-old child.
Absolutely, child. That's true.
And then they become adults. So in a similar way, Endeavor really started off by working with entrepreneurs at different stages, but we focus on the entrepreneurs that are past the startup stage. There are a lot of organizations out there that support startups in the early stage, which is great.
Like accelerators and incubators.
Exactly. But the problem is that you'll have a few of these entrepreneurs that will break from the pack, and they will outgrow the support that they can get from these organizations. So a lot of the times they become contributors to these organizations. But the entrepreneur becomes in a place where they're not a startup, but they're not a large corporate. So they're almost like in this very weird adolescent teenager phase where they have this incredible amount of energy, but there's so much change, so much chaos, and there's so much potential, but there's so much risk to really derail and potentially go off tangent. And ironically, the process that got them to this stage is a lot of trial and error and experimentation, and the entrepreneur being very focused and really kind of having their fingers in everything and kind of figuring things out. That actually becomes one of the things that holds them back from taking it to the next level, because the entrepreneur becomes overwhelmed. The entrepreneur does not necessarily have all of the skill sets required in the different functional parts of the business. A lot of the times they have to make decisions that they haven't faced before, and they don't know what to do.
Absolutely.
And they often look around and they can't find, they find it very difficult to get somebody to help them.
Or at least share the pain with them.
Sharing the pain is one thing, but sometimes it's really figuring out what's going on and what to make a decision. So a lot of the times their team are either not at the level where they can brainstorm with the entrepreneur to come up with something, or there might be you start having vested interest. So you have employees, investors, suppliers, customers. Each has an agenda or a vested interest that the entrepreneur has to factor in when they're discussing with them, because they want to make sure the entrepreneur wants the best to achieve success, which they have to kind of figure out what is the right way after you kind of factor out the conflict of interest. Endeavor solves that problem by curating a list of mentors that are very capable, very successful. So they're usually successful entrepreneurs, C-level executives in top firms, top-level investors, top-level consultants, who have a lot of experience and want to give back. We curate by finding these entrepreneurs that are at that right stage, have the desire and the potential to scale to the next level. And then we have, on the other hand, mentors and other successful entrepreneurs who have been through a similar journey or have relevant experience that might help the entrepreneur make better decisions. And then we give the entrepreneurs access to these mentors or other people to help them make better decisions, or
overcome this sort of confusion period.
Yeah, sometimes it's a lot of the questions that they get asked. They help them identify blind spots. They help them see around the corner. Sometimes they kind of share with them observations that they have. So, another entrepreneur. So let me give you an example.
Yes, please.
We had one entrepreneur, and I can't give you names, but had a relatively earlier stage company, hit the inflection point very quickly. Growing very quickly. They had raised a Series A. They were raising funds for Series B. And entrepreneur called me and said on a weekend and said, look, I was talking to one of the investors and I was offered a full buyout for a few $100 million. I believe this could be $1 billion business, but it's very hard to say no to a few $100 million. What should I do? I'm like, I don't know the answer to that because I've never been through such a thing, and I don't want to give you advice that ends up being whatever I tell you is going
target.
to be, whatever I tell you is going to be theoretical. But what I can do is I can connect you to another entrepreneur who has been through the process of negotiating exits or negotiating these situations, and I can also connect you to one of our mentors who comes from private equity and venture capital background, who has seen a lot of these transactions. Talk to them. Usually the Endeavor team is there so that we can get insight. But I told them, this is a very sensitive topic. I'll connect you to them, talk to them privately, so you can share all of the information privately. And then if you feel it's helpful, great. If not, come back and we'll find other people potentially from other markets. Connected the entrepreneur to both of them. He called me back, I believe, a couple of hours later. He said, perfect. I know exactly what I need to do. This was the insight that I needed. I know exactly what I do. And the entrepreneur ended up not selling the business, and achieved, is one of the most successful. He's running one of the most successful companies in the region. So it's a small thing, but it had such a huge impact on the entrepreneur, because if you put yourself in that entrepreneur's shoes, it's a difficult decision to make.
It is.
Do I sell for a few $100 million and then figure out my next step, or do I push? And it's
extremely high risk. I mean, the decision itself, the process of making the decision, the mindset to just be and to make choice between those two is just unbelievably complicated.
Yeah, and there are other situations. So we had one entrepreneur, for example, that was deciding whether he should grow the business by expanding the product line, or by expanding to new markets, and the feedback from the different mentors was, one person said, look, you should be really focus on one theme and just kind of grow the business on that theme. Another one said, look, Saudi Arabia is definitely the market where you can triple or 5x your revenues. That's where you should go. And both of them were very valid approaches, but the value was the logic behind it, so that the entrepreneur was able to kind of get the logic and then decide from there which door to take, so to speak. So it's not necessarily that there's always one right answer, but what the entrepreneur benefits from is having access to somebody who can think about it with them, who's very credible, who has either been through this journey before or has insight to help the entrepreneur kind of organize their thoughts and to say, okay, I see these different routes. This one makes the most sense to me, but they're making a much more informed decision. You probably will never get to 100% information so you can make a perfect decision, but you can go from having 5 or 10% insight to getting, let's say, 50, 70% insight, and the entrepreneur can be a lot more confident. And sometimes the feedback, what the entrepreneur gets is pushback. So sometimes the entrepreneur is very convinced. So we had one entrepreneur that was growing very quickly. Business was doing very well, and I was sitting with a couple of the mentors and was saying, we're launching this initiative, we're launching that initiative and that initiative. And one of the mentors, it was an advisory board where 3 mentors would meet with the entrepreneur quarterly. So it's like a board of directors, but without the governance. It's purely advisory. And one of the mentors said, look, if you keep doing this, you're going to kill your business. And everybody laughed because it was a shocking statement. And the entrepreneur was like, yeah, but I don't like being caged. And the other mentors were saying, look, you have a really great business. You have something that's working, that has potential to grow, 10x. Yeah. If you start opening so many different businesses or side projects, you're taking away from the core. So you need to focus on that core and grow it. And one of the mentors actually gave the analogy or the example of Nike, where he said they started with running and then they moved to basketball. Absolutely. And then they moved to the next sport. They didn't go to all sports right away. That entrepreneur really resisted that feedback. It's like, I just feel like I have so many ideas. I don't want to be caged. And unfortunately, he went out of business. He didn't take the feedback and went out of business. So going back to your question, the problem that we're solving is that when entrepreneurs get to that stage, that adolescent stage in their business, it's a very confusing time. It's a very there are a lot of changes that happen in the organization, and for the entrepreneur, and there's a lot of chaos, but there's a lot of potential. What we can provide for them is giving them access to people and resources that can help them, guide them to kind of achieve success, so that they don't have to make a lot of unnecessary mistakes. And learn by trial and error. They can learn from other people, or at least get insight from other people, so that they can get further and get there faster than they would on their own.
And I can see immediately that the significance of the problem is really big. Yeah. I mean, if those services, if those sort of insights are not given to those entrepreneurs, apparently, if the entrepreneur is an engineer or a coder or whatever they are, their technical knowledge is probably strong and deep, but then the knowledge and know-how of the market, of the customers, of the business, of the employee management, of the culture, and all that kind of very soft element of running a business and taking it, like you said, to the next level. Yeah. It's no one teaches you that. Even in MBAs or in business schools, they don't teach you that. And even if you teach it, it's like teaching a swimmer how to swim by reading a book. It doesn't work that way. So it's either putting people together as coaches, as mentors, like you said, and then learning by doing and trying to learn from someone else's mistake, or learn from your own mistakes, but at least be guided. And that problem that you're trying to address is significant. And I agree with you. But it sounds to me like it's more, how do I say it, ad hoc or random. Like, for example, the problem of expansion. In my mind, the solution to that is market research, some strategic insights into, okay, what's the market size? How's the appetite? What's the geopolitical situation? And then all of these data points, you put them together into a model, and then you brainstorm with yourself, with your employees, with your consultants, whatever it is. And then you make a decision based on this informed input. Having someone's opinion, no matter how expert they are, even if it's Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, it's still one person. Now, that's still much better than having your own mind thinking about what do I do. Yeah. But is that a better alternative to market research, in your opinion?
I don't think it's either or. So I've had the benefit of running Endeavor for 10 years in the UAE. So I had the privilege of being able to see a lot of trends.
Yeah.
One of the important things that I noticed is that when you say the word entrepreneur, most people have kind of some picture or image or a profile of a person in their mind. And what I learned is that entrepreneurs come in very different shapes and sizes and approaches. So there are some entrepreneurs who are shoot first, aim later. There are some entrepreneurs that come from a consulting background, so they're much more structured, they're much more organized about what they do. And like there's so many differences. What Endeavor can do for these entrepreneurs is So, for example, one of the things that we do, and we're very, very adamant about doing it in the UAE, is setting up an advisory board for the entrepreneurs. And usually they resist it because they say, well, I have access to different mentors. And we tell them, like, please trust me. At least try it. And if you don't like it,
let's reflect on that. Why would anyone reject an advisory board?
You know, I have this challenge with my team where we have to push them, because a lot of these entrepreneurs are very resourceful, and they're used to figuring things out on their own. So usually when we tell them an advisory board, maybe the name gives them an impression that this is like an official board of directors. It's bureaucratic. There might be some baggage that they associated, and some of them have official boards. So they tell us, look, I have a board. I don't need a second board, and already, managing my existing board is difficult. And some of them, they say, look, if this is a matter of accessing mentors, I'd rather just have these one-on-one meetings with them. And usually when I go back to them and tell them, look, we have a process for organizing the board. We've been doing it for 10 years. And we've seen that, 99, I just had a meeting yesterday with one of our entrepreneurs, and I said, look, I really, I don't want to shove it down your throat. If you don't want it, it's fine. But I've been doing this for 10 years. And 99% of the time, when we tell an entrepreneur, let us put an advisory board for you, and like a lot of the times they're not sure. When they do it, after the first advisory board session, the entrepreneur calls me and says, thank you for forcing me to do it. I get it. I understand now. So maybe a short answer to your question, why they might not do it, is they might associate it, let's say, with the experience they had with their existing board, or they might think that it's a lot of time and they don't have the time to do it. But we usually explain to them that we can reduce that time. We can do a lot of that admin work for them too, so that they can focus. So we were talking about
the advisory board for that entrepreneur.
Just trying to remember what the example was about. What was the topic that we were talking about?
We're talking about that entrepreneur that you were trying to convince with having an advisory board. And then I interjected by saying, how can someone reject an advisory board? So I'll tell you what.
Anyway, we'll come back to it.
Exactly. So you provide advisory, and that's obviously I would say any advice is the number one source of value for any entrepreneur. And that's why probably I was amazed by anyone who would reject advice at that stage.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, but I disagree with that statement.
Okay.
Not any advice is valuable. There's some advice that's actually destructive to the entrepreneurs.
So I agree with your disagreement, provided that my sentiment was I would take any advice, but it's up to me to qualify and validate the advice and take it or not. Because the opportunity lost is like the value of the opportunity lost, or let's say to me, I would rather have everything and be selective rather than the selection mechanism be outside of my domain, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying,
So in this case, I would look at all the advice, and obviously I am the owner of my business. I am the entrepreneur. So it should be, realistically speaking, my decision to whether take this advice or not. Now, in reality, the entrepreneur is a well-educated. He understands the business. He is on a growth trajectory, so the growth mindset is extremely high in the sense of every day. It's not just 1%, it's 10% growth for him from an education, from a learning experience, and so their critical thinking mindset is always on high alert, and therefore they should be receptive to all advice, in my opinion. And that's why I said what I said. Now, that could obviously introduce a lot of noise, and I agree with that. But then this is where your interpreter or your filtering system is also very high, because when you have a higher filtering system, you're able to filter out the noise. And then in time, you'll have that circles of yours that will able to understand you, and you'll be able to gravitate towards them more and more. So that's one value that you offer, which I agree that entrepreneurs are lonely. Not lonely because they don't have friends, lonely because it's like a PhD student who no one is able to talk their language, and they're their pain points, their suffering, their struggles are unique to them.
Very few people have experienced it. Yeah.
And very, very few people, like in my circles, I have literally a handful of people that are true entrepreneurs. The rest are either employees or people who think they're entrepreneurs, but really they're just freelancers who live project to project and they're not on a growth trajectory. When it comes to exit, and this is where I want to kind of end the first part and kind of pivot to the next part.
Sorry, before you go, I just have two things that I want to say. Like on the topic of all advice is valuable and it's up to you to filter it and decide. Theoretically, I would agree, but in practice, what I know, what I've seen is that entrepreneurs are starved for time. So getting all of that advice and filtering becomes very frustrating for them because sometimes it can create a lot of noise pollution for them, and sometimes it's just a waste of time for them. So, I mean, I guess I'm not trying to plug Endeavor here, but what I'm saying is that based on my experience, the value that they have by joining organizations like Endeavor or YPO or other is the filtering. There's a filtering process to it.
The qualification of the individuals or the advice before. Okay.
Because
I get
so if you are, it's really curated, and then within that curation, okay, then you can take different advice and it becomes very valuable and you can decide. But it's, my son was playing football on the weekend, and I was just watching all of these dads on the sideline, like shouting like at their kids, like telling them, do this, do this, do this. And sometimes you can see some of the dads that know nothing about football, and the advice they're giving the child is wrong advice. And I understand the temptation because I'm a dad and I have my son. I'm like, I'm itching to kind of tell him what to do. But the coach who really knows what he's talking about, that should be the voice that my son listens to. I can give him my input because I play football and I have some knowledge of it. But then if I notice that my advice is in contradiction to what the coach is, I tell my son, listen to the coach. This is somebody who knows what he's doing. He's getting clear results. So that's just on that point. What we were talking about before is like when you were talking about like for entrepreneurs to make a decision on market expansion, they need to do research and then go. Some of the value that they can get is that some entrepreneurs are not doing that because in the early stage, they don't have enough information. They don't have enough traction to do that market research. So what a lot of them do is they do kind of an iteration process to say, we're just going to launch them and then whatever works, we'll just double down on it, which works very well. But after a while, it becomes an issue. So let me just give you an example to crystallize this. So one of the companies that we have in our portfolio are these two entrepreneurs, Ananya Narayan and Jan Narayan from Hunter Foods. Better for You snacks product. A lot of people don't know that this company started on the same day that Emirates Airlines started. So it's actually the first facility that started in Jebel Ali. Very old business, started by the initial founder. They had, so most people that grew up in Dubai know their products, Alibaba chips and Safari chips. They grew up on them. Anyway, the business grew and did quite well. Ananya, the founder's son, was in hospitality with his wife and was not interested in working the family business because he had this career in hospitality. Long story short, he had to come back because his father had health issues. He had to come back to kind of take over the business. And the business was in some trouble. So one of the things they did is they kind of expanded their product line and they launched a gourmet line, which is doing exceptionally well. And then they just kept introducing so many different flavors and so many different products. And the business did well. And when we engaged with them was when they were at that kind of, not that, the first inflection point was when they came in and they shifted, but they were kind of in chapter 3 where they're saying, okay, now we're looking at the next level and we're not sure what's the best way to grow. And as they were going through our selection process, the feedback they were getting from mentors is that you have way too many products. You have Hunter's Gourmet, you have Safari, you have Alibaba, and then within then they had different ingredients, and they were telling them that you're just doing so many things, it's a good idea for you to kind of rationalize your products and then prune out the ones that are not performing and double down on the ones that are performing, so that you have this constant exercise. And they were like, yeah, but this is what got us to succeed. And then they eventually started analyzing, and they realized that they had so many SKUs that were just not performing very well. And they ended up cutting out, I don't remember the number, but a significant amount of their products. And it had almost no impact on their revenues. It actually had a positive impact because they started really doubling down on the ones that were working very well. And then when they're looking at expanding to other markets, again, they went with the approach of kind of putting their flag in so many markets. And then the mentors were kind of telling them, look, this is great, but there's a better way to do this. You can look at the different markets, prioritize them based on which ones have the highest potential and the ease of entry, and then just prioritize them. It's better to do a few markets really well rather than 10 markets semi-well. It's very basic advice, but
see, advice is always basic depending on which perspective you're looking at.
Exactly.
It, right? I mean, a friend of mine once told me, I'd rather have half a melon than 10 grapes.
Yeah.
So there is merit to that, but I think we agree that advice is very important.
Yeah.
But also advice needs to be vetted, and if the vetting process is outside of anything that the entrepreneur has to do, it will win time for the entrepreneur, and then it will have that much accuracy and value. Yeah. And I think I'm sold on that.
Sorry, just one more comment.
Of course.
No, what you're saying, I think we're in agreement here. The way I see it is the process of getting that advice and applying it to the business takes the entrepreneur to get the entrepreneur to work on the business rather than work in the business.
Yes,
and
I agree.
Often the entrepreneurs they spend so much of their time working in the business that they become very tactical, that just the process of kind of taking a step back and saying, even explaining what their business is doing and what they're planning to do and being asked questions, even if they're not getting advice, just that process of doing that,
it hones down on
it forces them to take a step back and really work on the business to say, okay, instead of just putting my foot to the
100%.
pedal, this is my ability to say, okay, where are we going? It's not just about pressing the gas, it's about where are we going?
Absolutely.
So that's part of the value that.
Well, I'll tell you what, my personal experience. So since I started AxiMind, which is my startup a year and a half ago, I remember very first few times that my executive friends or my, let's say, high profile friends who were interested in the concept and this, and every time they ask me, they get confused. And in time, every new one that asks me a new question about what am I doing, my answer gets that much clearer and focused to the point that now I'm able to have an elevator pitch that explains, and probably this is what we had the first time we had a discussion on the phone, that, okay, this is the business, this is a problem, this is a solution, these are the pillars, and this is the outcome, period. And that number of me trying to explain what am I doing helped me hone down the elevator pitch or the concept explanation, the communication, to the point where I'm able to have that 10,000 feet view, like bird's eye view instead of the tactical view, which is 100% true.
It's amazing. I think one of our mentors, who's become a very good friend of mine, his name is Salim Sakour. He's one of the four brothers, the Sakour brothers. Yeah. They own the brand, the international brand. He was, we were talking one day, and he was telling me that his daily routine is that he wakes up very early in the morning, I think at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and he reserves an hour of his day in the morning to just think. He doesn't do anything, he just thinks. And I found that to be a little bit, it actually surprised me to like the way that he phrased it. But the value behind that is that it helps them kind of take a step back and kind of just align in terms of what he wants to do, rather than just kind of wake up and just jump into doing stuff.
I think clarity is a lost, let's say, it's a lost activity or a lost goal that people don't know. Like, they want to be as efficient. Like, I always think of myself, I don't want to be efficient. Efficiency is, if it's the goal, then usually it will be at the expense of something else, and that something else, usually it's clarity. Because the more you're trying to be efficient, the more you will be confused. Whereas if you're effective, not efficient, then you will aim to be clear about what you want to do, because that's an outcome instead of an input. So, I mean, everything that Endeavor is doing is, it sounds like it's a dream for anyone who wants to do entrepreneurship, start a business, grow. What's the catch for them?
There's no catch. The whole idea is Endeavor is there as an organization to help you grow and your business and succeed. If you want to call it a catch, the requirement is that there's an agreement that when you achieve that success, you're going to give back to the organization. Through the organization, you're going to give back. So Endeavor is very allergic to entrepreneurs who are takers, who will just take, and then when they achieve success, they kind of...
So any entrepreneur who comes and wants to be part of this ecosystem, they have to identify their value exchange from their end. So what value they're getting, they need to be clear about the value that they're giving in return?
Not necessarily. So they don't have to give that value there. They have to be... they have to have the intention to give back when they're in a position to give back. So usually, let's say if they engage with Endeavor and their business is, let's say, at whatever, $8 million of revenue, and they're growing very quickly, and they see this to become, let's say, a $200 million business. We don't expect them to give something back right away, but fast forward a couple of years, they have, let's say, an exit, or the business becomes quite successful. They have to have the intention to want to give back, to mentor, to invest in the next generation, to become a board member with Endeavor. That intention has to be there. And we don't kind of tell them, here, sign the paper, tell us exactly what you're going to do, and then sign the paper, and then we're going to go hold them to it. But there has to be that intention to want to give back.
How do you measure that intention, and how do you kind of monitor it and realize it? I know I'm talking strategy and management terms, but to me, this is too abstract and too dangerous and too opportunistic for opportunistic behavior, if that makes sense. So people can come and take, and there's no strings attached, and then they leave, and then they've done it. There's no way. I mean, I worked in the consulting business, and I know my number one let's say philosophy is get paid first, then deliver, because once I deliver, I cannot take back what I delivered, because it's consulting, it's advice, it's training. So
look, it's there's a mindset, so initially, when sometimes the entrepreneurs that come from a background that, they have a very transactional background, they ask that question. There's like, what's the catch?
Yes.
How can you guys make sure, etc. The way we filter for this is, for somebody to become selected as an Endeavor entrepreneur, it's not a very simple process. It's not like a single meeting. Okay, do you want to do it? And let's go. There's a rigorous process to it that takes on average 6 months. They meet anywhere from 12 to 18 mentors or people from the network, locally and internationally, between the time that they start until they're selected. And all of these interactions, there's a lot of data points that are collected there. And usually, so very briefly, the first meeting is with a team member. The second stage is 6 one-to-one meetings with different mentors, 1 hour session, question and answer, and then we take feedback from each of these mentors. The third step is a local panel where we'd get 6 panelists sitting in 3 pairs.
Wow.
They meet with all of the 3 for 1 hour each, and they deliberate. And the last stage is an international panel, again, from the international network, where they meet with 3 pairs, 1 hour interview each, and then the panelists deliberate, and all of the panelists have to vote yes. If 5 panelists say yes and 1 says no, the entrepreneur is not selected.
It's a veto system.
Yeah, it has to be unanimous. Everybody has to say yes. And all of these meetings, if somebody has the mindset of just wanting to take and like they don't want to give back,
obviously,
it will pop up. There will be red flags, and when you have multiple
the period is long enough, and the interaction is with so many people that one will have some sort of a word or something to telltale on that intention.
Now,
and that's systematic.
That's very systematic. It's a rigorous process, and it works. I mean, I think that's one of the things that Endeavor does very well, is selecting entrepreneurs that have the potential to succeed and have that mindset. And then the other thing that overlaces with that is that when the entrepreneur meets with all of these people, number one is they say, okay, what they tell us right away after a couple of meetings is that, okay, I heard that you guys have good people in the network, but like the level of people that they're talking to in the conversations, usually to tell us they're really impressed by it. And like these are some very high level entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs.
The mentors.
The entrepreneurs that we're dealing with, a lot of them are very successful. Some of them are second, third time entrepreneurs. Very achieved people that have very strong networks. But they often come and tell us, look, the power of the network that you have locally and internationally is very, very high level.
And that's your IP.
That's one of them. That's one of the amazing things. Then the second thing they tell us is that they're like, I didn't understand why they were just donating. Why are these mentors just donating their time? But as they go through it and they see that these people are volunteering to kind of sit with the entrepreneur to give back without really wanting anything in return, they say, okay, well, I get it. Now I'm part of a network that's very selective about who's in there. I buy into the idea. And there are some people, like, for example, the founders of Careem, it took us 4 years to get them on board. The thing that always made them want to be part of the network is that when we explained to them the whole multiplier effect and just how the network works, that was the biggest selling proposition for them, because they wanted to give back and they see it as they just understand and believe in that mindset.
Do you feel that's a natural part of the entrepreneur's DNA, wanting to give back, or it's not necessarily true?
It depends. Some entrepreneurs, yes.
On average, relatively speaking, compared to non-entrepreneurs?
It's very difficult for me to tell you, because I have a very skewed view, because I work with entrepreneurs that, so I will tell you yes, but that might be because I'm working with them. Your sample is people who are actually having that in their DNA. Okay. So I mean, I might have met 1,000 entrepreneurs in the past 10 years.
Right.
The ones that really stick out as like they just don't have that mindset, we usually don't go past the first, and very few of them they'll go past the first one, and then they're filtered at some point. So my interaction with them is very limited. So, but I spend maybe over 90% of my time with entrepreneurs that have that mindset. So what's the exit clause? Like they now come, they're part of the system halfway through, whatever happens, how's the divorce filing? There is no divorce. So when somebody is selected into Endeavor, they're selected for life. They're an Endeavor entrepreneur for life. Okay. We tell them our relationship is with you as an entrepreneur. The only reason why there is a divorce is if the entrepreneur does something illegal or unethical, where we'd say we're not associated with 100%. This person anymore. But as long as they don't do anything like that, the relationship is always with them, and the life cycle evolves. So there's one stage in the selection process. There's one stage when they're growing and they're scaling their business and they're extracting value from Endeavor. There's one stage where they're mentoring, and that can overlap with the stage where they're growing their business. And there's one stage where they're giving back to Endeavor. So, Mudassir, for example, the founder of Careem, he's a founding board member of Endeavor Pakistan.
Wow, okay.
Guillaume Poussas.
So they can take the concept itself and take it somewhere else around the globe.
Endeavor launched Endeavor Pakistan, but he was one of the people that really kind of adopted Endeavor in Pakistan and also
obviously endorsed it and
is providing financial support to it and really guiding the team on the ground there. So, and there's countless examples of them, some of these entrepreneurs who mentor with us or are board members as well. So,
there's no really an exit. Like it's some sort of a symbiotic relationship between two really purpose-driven individuals or entities. And because of the purpose that's being extremely objective and extremely, how do I say it? Would you say morally driven? Is there a moral element into it here?
Yes, there is a moral element, and there's
I don't want to get philosophical here, but you know what I mean. Like when morals are there, when human element is embedded,
there's a relationship. There's definitely a relationship,
especially when it comes to the purpose. If the purpose is the human element, then that's
So I mean, we're not presumptuous to the point where we say we're family to the entrepreneur. Right. Some entrepreneurs use that term, but I think it's a bit too presumptuous, because family is of course it's a different thing, but it's very close to a very good friend. So, everybody has this really good friend that you might be out of touch for a couple of years, and then you You meet up again, and like it's almost like you like there is no disconnect, and you just pick up where you left off. Endeavor is like that. So what is happening with Endeavor? Because as we grow as an organization, we're finding that there's different stages with these entrepreneurs. So some of these entrepreneurs, they're scaling their business, so they might exit, and then some of them go on to become investors. Some of them go on to start second businesses. Some of them take some time off in between to figure out what they want to do. Some of them go on and take jobs. Some of them retire, whatever it is. So the relationship evolves. So let's say the typical route is either they go to becoming investors or they go to the route of starting another business.
Yes.
So we're actually in the UAE, for example, having been here for 10 years, we actually have quite a few entrepreneurs that are in transition. So
between their first
startup and their second one. So Mohammed Balut, he was with BNB Group.
Okay.
They had a firm that invested in them. He sold his shares. His co-founder stayed in the business, and so he took about, I think, 1 or 2 years where he set up a VC firm. We stayed in touch to say, okay, he kept kind of telling us, here's what I'm thinking. And, we just kept connecting him to people. And then he put the dots together. He eventually started Kitopi. And then he came back to us and he told us, I want to re-engage with Endeavor. And I want to go through the whole selection process again because I have new co-founders. And because I got so much value from the process the first time, I want my co-founders to go through the process as well, even though he had the option to just activate locally. So that's one. But then we have now, his co-founders from BNB recently sold their business to Outlier. So they're about to hand it over. And then there's Mona Ataya from Mom's World, whose business was acquired. We have a few entrepreneurs that are at that stage. So for us as an organization, we're stretching ourselves to say, rather than being ad hoc in terms of how we work with these entrepreneurs, we want to start structuring something to be able to add value to them. And then let's say for the ones that start second businesses, then there's another, then they could re-engage or there's a different value proposition there.
So if let's take one step higher, one level higher. So Endeavor, this region versus what other regions are there?
So there's Latin America. That's where the largest footprint is. Okay. And just to kind of give you an example, I'll give you 2 things to just show you.
Yeah.
Actually, let me tell you the regions and then I'll come back. So Latin America is the largest footprint. That's where it started. Middle East is the second largest footprint. And we're present in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Turkey.
That's your area, or?
That's the Middle East. I manage the UAE.
The UAE chapter.
Every country has a managing director with its own team and its own board members. Yeah. And then there is Africa, and then there is Southeast Asia. So, and then we have the US and Canada, but those operate on a city level. And we have Europe as well.
Okay. So when you juxtapose, when you compare all of those together, you said Latin America is number 1, then the Middle East collectively?
Number 1 in terms of the size of the portfolio.
Yes.
So the largest footprint
Let's say you said outcome driven, and you said the size of the outcome and how the impact is.
You mean the success stories?
Success stories, exactly. So if you take that as a measure, how do you rank those areas?
I would say a lot of the success stories so far have come out of Latin America.
Okay.
That's partly because Endeavor has been operating there for 10 years more than everywhere else. So there are companies like Mercado Libre and others that have become incredibly large and very successful. And there are some big markets there like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, where there's a very large critical
mass. The buying
mass.
Power is very high.
But we're getting a growing number of entrepreneurs that are, or success stories that are coming out of the Middle East. Kareem is a good example. Turkey, there's Yemek Sepeti that was acquired by Delivery Hero for $580 million. Property Finder, Mom's World, Kitopi, Tabi. There are a lot of companies that are coming out of here and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other markets. there are quite a few coming out of Asia as well, particularly from countries like Indonesia and Malaysia.
Yeah.
Africa there are a few great companies coming out of there, including South Africa and Nigeria and others. If the question is on success stories, I would say most of them coming from Latin America. I would say maybe the second largest presence is Middle East, and then there's Europe and Asia and others. If we're looking at the individuals, because one of my questions that I had in my mind when I joined was, how will entrepreneurs in the Middle East stack up compared to entrepreneurs in other markets? It was something I was very curious about, because
that was my next question.
Because we have this, a lot of people have this mindset that we don't have as many good entrepreneurs, or we don't have as much good talent compared to other markets.
It's not the quantity of them. It's not a quantity quality discussion. It's more of how many Ubers, which is vis-a-vis Careem, how many of those are here? How many, just to simplify, how many unicorns do we have here? Because that's sort of the universal success, like ultimate success for entrepreneurs. And that looks like it's not as...
So it's become a proxy for success. I think it's a bit...
not success, ultimate success. I mean, this is a bit on the mass media sort of adoptions, like, the next Careem, the next Uber, the next Tesla, those kind of names.
Yeah, look, I think one of the former board members of Endeavor Global, which is based out of New York, which basically organizes all of the offices, his name is Jason Green. Very, very accomplished investor. I think 30% of the companies he invested in achieved unicorn status. Incredible.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah. He's a very impressive human being and super nice person. One of the things he was in a selection panel for one of our entrepreneurs, and I don't remember the exact discussions, but he said that a lot of people have caught the unicornitis bug. Everybody is aiming for the unicorn status, which is it's a nice status to have, and I think it's amazing. It's a good measure of success. But I mean, if you think of a business, the ultimate measure of success is that they have a thriving, sustainable business that can generate profit eventually. So, but going back to your question in terms of that, and we have, I believe, in our portfolio in the UAE, I believe we have 4 companies that are at that status, and one company is a decacorn. Although officially it's checkout.com. Officially it's headquartered in London, but the entrepreneur lives between here and London. It's part of the network, and that company is worth more than $10 billion. And it's actually...
How old is that company?
I should know this off the
more
top
than
of my
5.
head. Yeah.
More than 5 years?
I think it's about a 10-year-old company.
All right.
About 10 years old.
But practically they're not startup, are they?
Not anymore. Even Careem, I mean, right now...
No,
is
Careem
about 10
now
years
is
old.
not, But I mean, so you start as a startup, as an entrepreneur. You have this sort of small office with bean bags and foosball, and you just have pizza boxes everywhere. And that's kind of sort of the look and feel of that era. And then you go into a certain, like you said, inflection point where that environment does not work anymore. You need to have structure, you need to have the processes and procedures, you need to have governance to be able to manage the company at the next level, and so on and so forth. And then you go into the non-startup anymore, the adult stage, which is that's it. But you still started as a startup. You're not. I mean, that's the intention. Like the Steve Jobs is well known for saying that Apple is the biggest startup in the world, simply because it started as a startup and they still work on conflict, work on tension, work on arguments and brainstorming, and that's how startups work. So that's the intention of understanding. But I'm talking about the people who need your support, which are the startups who are obviously not in the 10 billion.
We call them scale-ups.
The smaller ones.
The later stage.
The later stage scale-ups, exactly. But those probably wouldn't need your support as much as the ones that are still in the...
Yes, they do. They do. You'll be very surprised how chaotic and how difficult it is for these entrepreneurs to manage these companies.
What can you offer to them?
It's just access to people that can help them think through things and help make better decisions.
But they have the
it's
capital to hire, I don't know, McKinsey or BCG or one of those big guys.
It's not the same. I mean, they do hire them and they get them on board, but some of the decisions they need to make are decisions that it's very difficult to get a consultant to do it. So let me give you an example.
Yes, please.
So Kareem came on board when it's a later stage company. And that's maybe one of the things that if I would be able to go back in time, I would have pushed a lot harder to get them, because I met Mudassir on my first week on the job. It was late 2013. I met him at a meetup for entrepreneurs, and they had just closed their Series A. And I explained to him what Endeavor is, and quote, his response was, look, this is a no-brainer, but we're already on 4 hours of sleep, and we just don't have the time to be able to engage in this. In retrospect, I would have loved to kind of figure out a way to get them selected. Right. So they were selected at a later stage. And the big question that a lot of people in the network were saying was, do they really need you? Because they were already quite large. This was February 2018. They were already they had at least 3,000 employees. They had raised multiple rounds of funding. They were beyond what we've seen with most startups. So the quantity of support we provided to them was much less than we would give to a company that is, let's say, at $5 million of revenue or $10 million of revenue. But one of the things they came to us, they said, look, we have two things. One is, as an organization, we went from having 400 employees to 3,000 employees in a span of 1 to 2 years. So the pressure on the organizational structure, it was incredibly high.
Yeah.
It was very it's real
I can
stress.
only imagine, yeah.
And one of the manifestations of that was they're saying the layer that is reporting to the founders, there's a lot of consistency in terms of how they're managing their teams. Mm-hmm. But the layer below that, there was a lot of inconsistency, because a lot of them went from being soldiers to captains, and some kind of took on that role quite well, and some were not doing it very well. So they're saying, how can we kind of iron that out, or to kind of improve that systematically? So one of the things we did is we set up a call for them with their head of HR, with the head of people at Slack, and to compare notes, to say, here's our pain point, here's what we're doing, and then just to compare note of what Slack did, and they found that helpful.
And you have access to Slack leadership?
Because that person was a mentor with Endeavor.
Okay.
The second thing they had, or another thing they had, was this was at the time when they were embarking on the stage of becoming a super app, to go from a ride-hailing company to becoming a super app. And their first vertical to go into was fintech, the wallet. Because they said that they discovered that accidentally, because a lot of people would fill their wallet for the ride-hailing, they discovered that without actually intentionally doing it, they were the largest e-wallet in the region, because there were so many people that had money in the wallet. And they said, okay, well, there's an opportunity for us to do something with it there. And they didn't know that business and how it worked. So we connected them to people from the Latin American network and from the global network that are in fintech, so that they can get a quick crash course on how do you do fintech in terms of payments, etc. And then there was another one where they actually had a meeting with the board of directors of Endeavor Global, which includes some very high profile people, including Jason Green, Reid Hoffman, and others, where they basically kind of said, here's what Endeavor is. And they got a lot of feedback. I wasn't in that meeting, but they came back saying that was an incredible meeting. They found it very helpful.
So this is how you can support the bigger guys.
So it's lower quantity but very impactful, because usually they'll have, every entrepreneur is struggling with something. There's something they have to unlock there. They have to unlock a lot of issues, and these are critical decisions. One of our entrepreneurs actually framed it very well. He comes from a scientific background. He's a PhD in science, and he said that specific entrepreneur said that he doesn't like meetings. He's allergic to meetings, because he says that as a CEO, I have to make few decisions, but they're very critical decisions, and I have to have the peace of mind to be able to think clearly and to make the decision very well. my management team has to make a lot of decisions that are less critical, that we can change and we can adjust. So he wants to minimize his involvement in those smaller decisions and to kind of empower the team to do it. But he wants to have the headspace to be able to make these very, very critical decisions. And usually where Endeavor can help is for the entrepreneur when they're at that stage of they're trying to unlock this and they're thinking through it, to get input from people who have either been through it before or other entrepreneurs peer-to-peer that are dealing with this issue, to be able to say, how did you handle this? So for example, Hussam Arab from Tabi, when he was going through the selection process, one of the things we did is get him to speak to an entrepreneur from Colombia who's doing a similar business. At the time, he was at a slightly he was running a larger, more advanced as a company, but they were able to have a peer-to-peer discussion on things that they can't talk to their competitors about. They would love to because they want to compare notes, but they're saying, okay, we're dealing with this issue. How did you handle it? Oh, that's very interesting. We approached it this way. And a lot of that time, those interactions help the entrepreneur think through these critical decisions. So they tend to be lower volume, but very impactful.
Much higher impact.
And we don't, again, we're not necessarily the organization that will unlock it for him or her, but a lot of the times it's just being able to get insight so they can at least have the right information. And sometimes it's just feeling that, Michael Lahyani from Property Finder articulated this very well. He said, the more successful the business gets, the more he has to deal with different agendas. Sure. And Endeavor is the only organization that he has a soft relationship with, because he doesn't have to worry about what are they trying to get out of this. Yeah. So if he comes to us and says, can you help me address this issue? It's because he knows that we're going to be on his side of the table to give him that access without trying to get something out of him.
Because of the nature of the business and how you're operating
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
So, let's go back to this region.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I started my business is a major gap that I've seen in this part of the world, which is innovation, especially radical innovation, production, exportation, and everything around that. And, just quickly to define innovation. Innovation is just novelty or some value that is being created that is so high that people are willing to pay in exchange for that value. For example, Kareem and others. Doesn't have to be extremely new. Yep. It can be something that's been done before, but it's done in a completely different or new way that radicalizes the way it's done, and people are kind of doing it or using it in masses. Yep. I don't see this is happening in this part of the world, relatively speaking, to other parts, especially in the East and the West. Do you see the same thing? Relatively, again.
So I have a tendency to give very long answers, so I'm going to try to give you as concise of an answer as possible here. Yes and no. So okay, let me start with the base. So going back to one of the things we were talking about before, if I kind of stack the entrepreneurs that I see in the UAE and the Middle East compared to entrepreneurs in different markets, including the US, I would say they're as good and sometimes better than or more capable
as individuals.
Okay. They're incredibly intelligent, very capable, very accomplished. So that layer is there. So if there's a disparity, it's not because the entrepreneurs are less capable. Now, I think if you look at it from a systemic point of view, there are differences. So one is, as a region, we're late to the game when it comes to entrepreneurship. As opposed to the US, for example, which is a very mature market, and then you have Europe, where they started on that journey, and you have this history there. And then if you're an entrepreneur that sets up in, let's say, Silicon Valley or New York, you can plug into an ecosystem, and if you have something that's working, you have a lot of investors, you have a lot of people that will want to work with you. You can move quick.
Yes.
So that's one thing. And when you think about the innovations, some innovations can be applied relatively with relatively less resources. The innovations that a lot of people criticize that we have less of in the Middle East are the ones that are groundbreaking. So why wouldn't an Uber come out of the Middle East, or why wouldn't a Facebook or something like that come out of the Middle East? Systemically, I think one of the issues is that these businesses require very patient funding that will give them enough time to be able to click.
Can I try to correct here? Patient funding or patient investors?
Yeah, I mean, patient investors. I mean, it's a better way.
Let's call a spade a spade.
Patient investors who have there's the capital and the intention, understanding that this could fail, but if it works, the maturity.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's maturity. Yeah, part of it is maturity. Part of it is just, there's so much capital and there's the willingness to take that risk. The second thing is the critical mass. So if you have something that clicks in the US, you automatically can spread to 300 million people. If you have something that clicks in the UAE, you get to 12 million people.
The geopolitical restrictions?
Yeah. So you get to, let's say, you have a population of 10, 12 million people. Then you have to go to Saudi. You have to set up a new company, new regulations, new talent, new...
So let me comment on that for a second, because I know that this keeps on coming all the time. If you look at the Global Innovation Index, which is the index that's released by the United Nations annually, you'll find that the number one innovator in the world is Switzerland. And Switzerland is just a little over 5 million population, and it doesn't have any natural resources. You'll find that USA is not always in the top 5 in the past 5 years or 10 years. It's probably got in the top 5 in the past few years only, and now it's even lost it. You'll find China in number probably 10 or 11 or some, it's hovering or oscillating around those numbers. How do you correlate this? How does this reconcile with your thinking process?
So honestly, I don't know how they're measuring in that study, how they're measuring what is innovation.
So I'll tell you just kind of quickly what my thinking about this is. Innovation in the Global Innovation Index, measures, it's mainly, there are 6 or 7 indicators. The 2 most quantifiable ones and easiest to measure or look at is patent applications and research publications or published research. And those are 2 of the 8. One of business maturity, the other is technological advancements, and so on and so forth. So there's qualitative measures and there's quantitative measures, but those 2 are numbers. Like you can go now to the journals, academic journals, and then put those countries together and see how much publications have been published and issued from here. You can look at the intellectual property bureaus around the world, and there's this entities that just collate and kind of corroborate all of these IP filings and gives you numbers. And you can see that consistently those 2 are the lowest from this region, despite having all the drivers, for example, are very facilitating and encouraging government, capital, talent. And obviously, we don't have any, much conflicts, especially in the GCC, when it comes to not just geopolitical, but also cultural or any sort of polarization when it comes to business or otherwise. So, if all the drivers are there, all the ingredients are there, why aren't we able, in your opinion, obviously, why aren't we able to achieve at least some of those indicators, which are realistically and academically from the past 50 years, good indicators to innovation or predictors to innovation?
So, I mean, if I unpack this, I would think we're talking about potentially 2 different things. One is in terms of patents and research, which I believe a very strong catalyst that can change the equation is how much money in terms of grants and funding goes into supporting research. So I had this meeting with a professor from Harvard that was doing a study on companies in the Middle East. And, I was meeting with him in our office, and we were chatting about different things. And one of the things I was telling him that, things are changing a lot in the Middle East, in the UAE, and Saudi is obviously doing a lot of changes. And one of the missing links is being able to attract, we're setting up a lot of universities, one of the missing things is attracting talent, like himself, for example.
A certain caliber of talent.
Yes, like a certain caliber of professors who are, they have a lot of experience and a lot of depth of knowledge and can facilitate in terms of getting a lot of things. And he surprised me with this answer. He said, it would be so easy for governments here to attract professors from these top universities if they just provide easy grants for research and development. Because one of the biggest pain points they have is applying for grants all the time so that they can keep funding their labs to be able to research.
Right.
So if the governments here provide that, make it easy, not all of them, but a significant number of them will be willing to come here. And the quality of lessons.
Here's where I sometimes disagree with this notion, because we ask too much from the governments. Governments are facilitators of, let's say, policy, of certain infrastructure, of conflict resolution, legislation. It's the builders of the highway. But where are the other corporates? Where are the other investors? Where are the other private companies that are supposed to pitch in? Because governments, at the end of the day, they have other bigger fish to fry, which is making sure that the country is run well, right? If they look at the other elements, so it's very difficult. They will be distracted all the time by the geopolitical instabilities, by the internal issues. So what's your take on that?
I agree, but with corporates
or family businesses,
I mean, corporates are businesses at the end of the day, and their main concern is to generate profit,
of course,
for their shareholders. Maybe again, this might be overgeneralizing, but a lot of the family offices here are companies that grew based on getting rights to certain brands and businesses from corporates, whether it's from the US or Europe, and basically be applying them here. There's, relatively speaking, there's less of them. You have less of the Procter and Gambles who are kind of coming up with their own products here. There are some of them, but less of them that are coming up with their own products where they can fund research that they can benefit from. Here, it's about really being able to do retail and other. So that might be
more on the consumption side rather than on the production side.
It's on the distribution from these family offices. So their partner in the international, let's say, whether it's in the US or Europe, are the ones that are coming up with the products, whether it's an automotive company or a consumer products company or other.
But that's what I'm trying to say. So if you look at Microsoft and OpenAI and the relationship that they have together, Microsoft have pitched $13 billion to OpenAI, right? Right from the beginning, without even having any clarity on the outcome. It's just, this is a promising idea. Many years ago, they formed this partnership, and it's a corporate. Now, could it have failed? Of course. And that's the essence of it. That's the J-curve that investors always think of. So, it goes back to the maturity and education that we were talking about earlier. And my mind, and this is where my mind kind of goes into this, let's say, deadlock, is that every time we think about this region, we think about governments first, whereas governments here are strides ahead from all governments in the world, and that's no easy feat. And it's reality. Is it because they're so competent that we're asking more of them? And why aren't we asking from the investors, from the billionaires, from the other, let's say, entrepreneurs who made it from the first and second and third, to actually focus on the foundational drivers for innovation and have the long run of, if I fund a research today, that research can turn out to be something that's radically changing the landscape of certain industry, probably 10 years from now, because research, that's the kind of difference in research and impact of research. So is it because of that? Is it because of maturity? What do you think? I mean, what do you see from your own experience across this landscape?
I think especially when you're in the GCC, and particularly in the UAE, having been here for a while, the government has done a lot.
Yes.
We had a retreat for Endeavor entrepreneurs in 2022 where we had, I think, just a bit less than 100 entrepreneurs from all around the world coming to Dubai, and kind of we designed this program for them to get insight. And on the last day, we had a session for them with His Excellency Hilal Al-Marri, and then with the Minister of AI to kind of speak to them, and it's a bit of an interactive session. And the recap at the end of the retreat, one of the entrepreneurs from Colombia was saying they are running the country like a business. And then one of them joked, he said, look, when I get back home, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to call it Democracy is Overrated. Because the way they're running the country, they were so impressed with how they're running the country here.
And by design. I mean, Sheikh Mohammed himself had a book called the Dubai Inc.
Yes.
Right? And the Sheikh CEO.
Which I think is amazing.
But my problem is asking from them, because that dilutes or let's say removes the responsibility from the actual people who should be on the forefront of this, which is people with, because it's all about, I mean, to your point, I mean, and there are two elements we will end up with. First is capital, and this is probably the thesis of what we're trying to say here. But when we talk about capital and funding and managing large sums of money that could probably be down the drain, but it's fine because you know that you're able to assess and then recoup. If you do 10, one will, kind of recoup for the 9. But when we focus on governments, it will remove the burden from the others, which is
I agree with you. I don't think the burden falls 100% on the government, but the government can encourage it. Definitely the private sector has a role to play, but I think it's a matter of if the government can do something there, it's to help kind of click the alignment between the commercial interest of the private sector and making these. But the second thing that I wanted to say is that I think it's great to have a lot of that research, because a lot of those are invention. I think the disparity or the disconnect between the rankings and how we're seeing is, I think there's a difference between kind of coming up with those inventions and then building a business that can scale.
Making it an innovation.
So regardless of where that invention comes from, to be able to, so in Endeavor, we kind of we don't use it too often, but one of the things we do is we categorize entrepreneurs when we're dealing with them. So we kind of built these kind of different types of entrepreneurs. So we have one that we call the locomotive. These are the ones that are running relatively traditional businesses, but they do them very well. So they're the Walmarts of the world, where they can do retail and they can do it so well that they're very difficult to compete with. The second ones are the ones that we call stars. And these are the ones where it usually revolves around the personality of the entrepreneur. So a lot of the influencers, the businesses that revolve around, so the Richard Bransons, the Oprah Winfreys,
key persons of influence,
Huda Kattan, etc., where the business is built usually around it. And then the challenge there is how to make the business sustainable and it's not 100% different. And then the third one were the ones that we call rocket ships. And these are the ones that take a business and they do it faster or more efficiently or better, usually by applying technology. So these are the companies like the property finders of the world, the Bates of the world, the ones that kind of take, let's say, a business that was done in a, let's say, manual way and kind of apply technology to do it in a more efficient way. And then the last category are the ones that we call diamonds. And these are the ones where they're coming up with something that fundamentally changes how a business is done. And these are very high risk, very high reward companies. This is where you would see the personalities like Elon Musk and others who are very, like you'd think like this person.
Like the Hyperloop and the...
And usually the entrepreneurs there are very contrarian in their thought process, and they really come at, they usually are very, they have the personality to go against the grain, and they really push against the grain. And sometimes some of them can be controversial figures. These businesses are the ones that can become huge success stories. But the rocket ships are also ones that we found that a lot of the success stories in Endeavor are rocket ships, because it can either take the form of somebody taking a business and doing it in a more efficient way, or it can take the form of founders. They see Uber is working really well in the US, let's apply the same business model for the Middle East, and how can we localize it? How can we localize it in a very effective way, and to do it potentially better than Uber did, so that the best recourse for Uber is to acquire them. So I think the rocket ship are the ones that we can see a lot of them in the region. The diamonds are the ones that we're seeing less of, and these might depend.
Relatively speaking,
I mean, even those ones, the diamond, you would see less of them. You'd see them in very large markets where there's very deep, patient investors, and there's access to technology, and there's So the three obstacles to scale a business that we see are access to capital, access to talent, access to markets.
Of course, yeah.
So on access to capital, we discussed.
Yes.
On access to talent, it's being able to find the right talent that can on key things, so whether it's developers or other that can really help this business scale. Yeah. And then markets is where if you have one of these businesses in China or the US, you're hitting like a very large market. You can get scale very quickly, as opposed to having to go across multiple borders, which is, you will be able to do it. But if you think of the big success stories in the Middle East, they usually have cracked two or three of the three main markets: UAE, Saudi, Egypt. So we're talking about Souk. We're talking about Souk, we're talking about Kareem, we're talking about Tabi, etc. And these are
but this is, there you go. I mean, if I want to have a new startup and I want to have that status of a rocket ship that would be able to grow exponentially and find the market, then I have these three markets, and because others have done it, and those markets are so progressive in the way they support entrepreneurship and startups and so on and so forth, and the policies and the governance around how can I accept and accelerate is there, then I do have that.
You do have that, but relative to China or the US, there's a lot more friction. There's significant amount of friction there. And these entrepreneurs are very resourceful, they'll do it, but if you take this entrepreneur and you transport her or him into a market like China and the US, same business, same traction, they will achieve much more success in those markets than they would over here, simply because they have less of that friction. So their resources and their mind.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but it can be debatable. I mean, the point is, if one can do it, then that can be multiplied. I mean, yes, friction, and I love
it's becoming easier, by the way.
Exactly, and I love the way you it's not limiter, it's friction. That means it's just slower. It needs more energy. It needs more effort. It needs more motivation, because if you're not that motivated person, you can be discouraged quickly, and so on and so forth. So I love the way you're framing it. So I mean, capital we discussed. Market we discussed. Let's end with talent.
Yes. Which is, by the way, the number one. It's the biggest out of the three.
And you and I agreed from the beginning, and multiple times we touched on this, that there is no difference. If anything, probably here is far more, let's say, ubiquitous, the talent, and because it's not just the talent within, it's the talent attracted from without. And the other day, I think last month, Sheikh Hamdan have posted that we're the third most, let's say, attractive city in the world when it comes to high caliber talent. So we have no shortage of talent, let's put it that way. And even if we do, it's easier to bring people from abroad with the golden visa and the facilitation and so on and so forth. I mean, where else in the world can an expatriate community have the same rights when it comes to business and dealings as a citizen, right? So let's put the government and everything aside. I want to touch on the corporate culture, because you mentioned something about when startups have a certain number of individuals, then it's easily managed. The moment this number gets multiplied, then there's this first layer and second layer, and then after that, it's sort of a black box. And having to manage that and the structure behind it. And I know you mentioned Slack and so on and so forth. And those are tools. I'm talking about the human interactions. I'm talking about the hidden agendas. I'm talking about, like you mentioned, the different motives behind what I want to do. And those are things that are completely abstract, completely outside. I mean, you can give all the incentives in the world, but people will always be people. You can never predict their reactions, their behaviors, and the way they deal with each other. One of the things that I've noticed is that people are sensitive when it comes to corporate culture, especially corporate cultures. Do you see the same thing?
It is very important. And the interesting thing that I observed is because I got to meet a lot of entrepreneurs, I walked into a lot of offices for these entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And it's very interesting. One of the things that that I observe is that the impression I get as soon as I walk into the office, you can, it's almost like there's a general aura, or there's a general vibe.
Yes.
That I like. I'm very very attentive to, in terms of how comfortable people look. Are people like very serious? Are people walking around? What's the general environment? And I mean, it's not what I mean. You can't really extrapolate the corporate culture completely from it, but you can see a lot of that. But
it's artifacts, it's telltales, right? It's kind of.
But some of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've worked with or have interacted with paid very, very close attention to the culture of the organization, particularly in terms of how they want it.
How they architect it?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say how they shape it, but because a lot of it in the early days, it's really the entrepreneur's values and entrepreneur's beliefs. And then how can they preserve it, or at least guide it as the business grows? Because if they don't pay a lot of attention to it, it's going to change.
It will be diluted.
It will be diluted. It might go off track. Like you'll have entrepreneurs saying that they feel like strangers in their own business because, in the early days, the entrepreneur is interviewing and hiring everyone. But, when you cross 200 people, the entrepreneur literally can't do that anymore. So
Absolutely.
They have to implement systems in terms of the hiring process, in terms of how they do it. And there are great examples like Amazon that even to date have this incredible process for interviewing. And they have, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but they have this, what they're called the bar raisers. Right. So there are a group of people in Amazon that have to interview people. So they have a very specific process for interviewing. Okay. And then they have a few people that have this status of being a bar raiser who are very, very experienced in interviewing, and they can veto the hiring of an individual just based on that. So that's part of they have a much more sophisticated process than what I'm sharing, but they have this process to make sure that they're hiring the right people. Or at least have less mishires than if without it. And then there's the process of what are the behaviors and the mindset that they want to encourage and to maintain within the organization, how well they keep interacting with people so that it becomes a significant part of the entrepreneur's attention. Yeah. So, I keep using Kareem as an example because they're just such amazing entrepreneurs. So between the three co-founders, Mudassir, Magnus, and Abdullah, one of them was focused on people. So they divided between themselves in terms of the responsibilities, and Abdullah had very clearly one of his main responsibilities is people. How can they maintain the culture?
I'm not surprised.
And they had this thing where I remember they sent us before they launched it, they had their manifesto, so to speak. They sent it to us before they released it to public, and you can feel how proud they are of it because they managed to capture what they wanted to capture in the organization. Obviously, the implementation of it is sometimes messy, or I don't know how it is.
It's organic anyway.
It's organic, but it's something that they put so much attention to.
Of course.
The same thing with so many entrepreneurs, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but there is a very clear. This is who we are.
Yes.
So this might not be a very good example, but just this morning I had this meeting with the principal for our school, and in the conversation we're kind of talking about what are the plans they have, etc. And he was telling us they had parents that were in his office I think a week ago, and they were asking him so many questions, and he was like, how are you doing on math, and how can you double down on math? And he's like, look, we're an IB school. We are not about if you care about just the super academic, if the only thing you care about is, I don't know exactly what they were asking, but it looked like they were very fixated on grades and like excellence. They're saying, look, if based on the questions you're asking me, if that's what you're looking for, that's what you value, we're probably not the right school for you.
Wow.
Because and he explained to them, we are about making sure that they're much more diverse. They're exposed to different things. And I'm not judging you. I'm not telling you what you're valuing is wrong. I'm just telling you, if that's really what you care about, we might not be the right school for you, which I think is a very courageous thing to say.
Yes.
In a similar way, an entrepreneur might say, look, for us, this is something that's important. And if you're not aligned with that, then this might not be the right organization for you. You might want to work somewhere else. So you might have two great companies, great corporate cultures, but I might fit beautifully in this one and really don't fit there, and vice versa. And so I don't think people should be thinking about it as right or wrong, but the key thing is that there's a very conscious effort and dedicated resources to be able to make it happen.
100%, because it cannot happen by accident. It's what surprises me, and I want to really take your view on this, since you've been working with startups. Let's say you said 1,000 startups for the past 10 years. Is that people pay very close attention on the branding, on the vision and mission, on the message, on the font, on the color, brand, and so on and so forth, on the strategy, on the goals and the KPIs and the measures and the timeline and all that sort of stuff, which is very clear and it's very, very important. But then so far, I am yet to see someone who pays equal and maybe more attention, or relatively similar attention, to corporate culture. Is that an observation that you also see? Or?
Yeah, it's a very clear trend that I've seen, that as the business grows, and again, I have a very skewed view of the entrepreneurs because of the type of entrepreneurs, because of the filtering that we have, the type of entrepreneurs we work with. But it's very, very clear that all of the ones that are very successful, all of them with no exception, have put dedicated, significant part of their personal, at least one of the founders, personal time and thought process in terms of making sure the culture is aligned, and sometimes and then just making sure that there is follow through on it. And the bigger the business gets, the more they focus.
The more at their level they have to focus.
Because if you think about it from an innovation perspective, innovation can be taking an invention and applying it to the market. So if the entrepreneur says, okay, I'm going to focus my energy in terms of how to commercialize this and how to gain more traction, the entrepreneur can also apply innovation to how they are, how they're hiring people and how their corporate culture is done. They can also apply it in so many different ways to different parts of the business. And the easiest manifestation that I've seen entrepreneurs, the ones that performed better, that have done very well, is figure out a way of how to systemize their interviewing process so that they can hire people. And some of them say, look, I know I'm bad at it. Can you please help me figure out how I can be better at hiring? But the point is that they're aware of it. They're not just focusing on 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll say, I've had some entrepreneurs tell me, I know I'm bad at it, and I've struggled because of this, because we have the wrong people on board. They're frustrated. I'm frustrated. The business suffers. Everybody loses when you have a mishire. And they acknowledge the fact that the bigger the business is, the more impactful it has. The more impact it has, because it drains resources. It drains the entrepreneur. So you'd have these entrepreneurs. I mean, yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who met with an entrepreneur who's running an earlier stage fintech, relatively early stage fintech company. And he was saying that it's a Series A, they raised a Series A funding. And he was saying that the entrepreneur was telling him that the feedback from investors, that when they compare the entrepreneur's management team compared to other portfolio companies at that stage, the quality of the people on the team is much higher than their peers. And that does not happen by accident.
No, at all.
That entrepreneur actually is a second-time entrepreneur. And this is one of the things we observed. A lot of our big success stories are second-time entrepreneurs, because they as the Americans say,
they felt the sting.
Yes.
They have the scar tissue.
They cut their teeth on their first business. They made a lot of the mistakes. Now in their second business, a lot of those
They know
naive
it.
mistakes that are behind them, and they can remove
Which
a
is
lot of that
which is a
unnecessary
pity,
friction.
because I mean, I always say this: a smart person learns from his own mistakes, but a wise person learns from the mistakes of others.
Yes.
And I had a friend of mine also who started a fintech business here in Dubai, and he, when we met as part of my let's say circles, he said, "Usama, what you're saying now is the first time I hear someone talks very passionately about culture, people, and their impact on innovation and growth." And he said, "You're right. Now I'm paying attention to it. I wish someone came to me 5 years ago when I started and said, please pay attention to this, because A, the hiring and firing will be that much more effective.
Yeah.
But also, he said, I wish I can go back and think about my business. The only thing I think about now is people. What keeps me up at night is people. It's not business."
Yeah.
And he's the founder. It's his idea. He's the technical person. He's the engineer. And to him, it's kind of killing him. So it's much more than hiring and firing, although that's the biggest part, but also it's the maintenance, it's the kind of making sure that people follow the same values, they have the same assumptions, the behaviors are well within what the company is, or it's in the best interest of the organization. Why isn't people paying attention to it? I mean, if I look between here and Silicon Valley, and let's just kind of circle back to that, because you said that maturity and all that. Now we can crash maturity with the ubiquity of knowledge and education and learning and internet. It's no more a secret. When you look at someone like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or any of those kind of big guys, they keep on saying over and over and over again, hire people that are smarter than me, because I need to be the least smartest people in the room. I am the one. Jeff Bezos, he keeps on saying, I'm the last one who speaks at meetings. I never speak the first, because otherwise I don't know what I'm missing from others, and so on and so forth. Why aren't people, especially in this part of the world, learning cues from these people?
They are. It's just not everybody is doing it. So
that's the point. Why not everybody? What's the point? What are we missing?
I don't think it's. I mean, your question implies that we are so far behind.
Aren't we?
I don't think we are. I mean, from again, my view is very skewed, but the entrepreneurs that I'm interacting with are paying a lot of attention to it, and they're asking for advice and support on it. At different stages, more the ones that are at a later stage, because they feel like they understand the impact of it. So my first thing is to say they are. So last week I had the meeting with one of the companies that we're working with, which is already a unicorn. And they just implemented a change management.
Right.
And like the entrepreneur, like when we asked them, what are your priorities for the year? That he said, our number one priority is that we've implemented this big change in the org structure, and we can see the impact it has on our corporate culture. And that's something that we want to address. So it's top of mind.
On that, how do they measure that what they're doing they're doing it right? How do they know?
So they look at the impact on the business, because usually when they're making this change, it's because they want to unlock something for a metric for the business, whether it's profitability or revenue growth or etc. The second thing they look at is just the general morale. So whether they look at the ratings on Glassdoor, they
pay attention to that.
Yeah, of course they do.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay.
And some of them, they solicit feedback from their
employees. That's a gold mine for people. I mean, if someone has 500 or 1,000 employees and they've been in the industry for more than 5 years, in the market for more than 5 years, those are, because it's invaluable.
Yeah, it's incredible.
But the question is, how many of them? Because I know your view is skewed.
Yeah.
And I'm very rational in my looking at things. And, it's like, if it's not impacting the outcome, if you still see people, so this is my field of research, right? All the academic literature has a let's sort of direct correlation between employee satisfaction, the fit between the objectives, the innovation objectives, and the corporate culture, and how healthy the corporate culture is, and how people view it, and how people feel about it, right? However, my research outcome was completely different, especially in this part of the world. It was in spite and despite that disconnect, that inconsistency, that incongruence between the corporate culture, what management feel, and what employees feel, is completely inconsistent. So people are disenfranchised, employees are not empowered, they feel that they don't feel that they have psychological safety in their workforce, and yet the company is performing. It's on a double-digit growth for the past 5 years, except 2020. And the only conclusion I can think of, and that wasn't part of my research, and I'm hoping that I'm able to kind of extend or expand on this research, is that the dynamics here is extremely unique. People are willing to put up with certain inconveniences, certain ways of management, certain environments, only because of the visa. We're all expatriates here, and there's that visa, lifestyle loss. The sad story is 80% of the employees probably have gotten cars and loans from banks, and they feel that, you know what,
out of necessity, they
exactly
have to live with.
Schools are expensive, lifestyle, so paycheck to paycheck model. I'm talking about the field people, right? And therefore they're still performing, but obviously the opportunity lost here is that radical innovation, is that ideation process that can turn an idea into an execution, is that entrepreneurial level at all the 1,000 employees, not just the founders.
But it's also, sorry to interrupt, it's also what in the HR field or in the people field, they call it discretionary effort, which is the gold mine that in every company would want to unlock. When you have employees who are going beyond the requirements and they're doing discretionary, they're putting in more effort because they believe in something and they're so engaged.
Not just more, it's all of you know, how many times have you read a book that you really enjoy and you can go through the entire book in 1 hour, and another book that you really don't enjoy but you have to, so you finish 5 pages or 6 pages and you barely get 20% of that. So it's not just the quantity, it's also the effectiveness, it's the cohesion. It's instead of sending 10 emails, I can pick up the phone and get the task done in a 5 minutes sort of effort. And that multiplier is how much weight do you have as an organization? And the thing that I've discovered is that people at the top would never be able to know. Because if you have a 10,000 or let's say 1,000 employees organization, you would never know what are those weights, what are those anchors that are grounding you and slowing you down from going up. And then, because of the way our minds work, we will think about governments, we will think about capital, we would think about all of those restrictions, geopolitical separations or policies. But in reality, it's really something much more nuanced and much more complicated and much more multifaceted, let's say, that needs that deliberate, and I love the way you've put it, which is the deliberate focus on the organizational culture and the ability to surgically understand, and that cannot happen by accident. And you cannot think of it as a normal activity that, you know what, let me just ask people, because guess what? If you're the head of the organization, you will never know how people feel, because they will always have a different mask when they see you, right? Because of all of those complications when it comes to behavior, when it comes to lifestyle, and so on and so forth. And I think that when you put all of this together, and then you look at our region, which is extremely, kind of control-oriented, which is extremely conflict-avoiding, risk-averse, as at a collective culture, right? Not the organizational culture, but as a high culture. What do you see this mix if you put it in the blender?
I think you're taking a bit too negative of a view of the region. And again, and I want to qualify this based on the fact that my visibility, particularly in terms of the deep knowledge, is for entrepreneurs based in the UAE and the type of entrepreneurs we work with. As an outsider for these companies, I don't have that visibility. So whatever I tell you is based on impressions and based on conversations that I've seen. But the entrepreneurs that manage to break through and to really succeed are the ones that put that time and that effort into saying, this is important. I'm going to dedicate time myself, and I'm going to make sure that we have the right people on board. So really silly example. I was at a dinner that was hosted by Badr Jafar, and they had a whole bunch of people. I was sitting across the table from Mudassir and Magnus of Kareem. They keep coming up as examples, just because they're coming up. In the middle of the dinner, they high-fived each other because they had extended an offer to a head of HR, and they received the email that she accepted the offer. And I told them, this is the first time that I see the entrepreneurs celebrating that somebody accepted the job.
Not an investment fund or some sort of project one. It's actually a person accepting.
They were celebrating the fact that person who I believe they believed that this person was very important, and because it was such an important thing for them. So they've put their mind to it, and they are making sure that there are people that can implement it. And a lot of these entrepreneurs, they solicit feedback. They might not have 100% visibility, but they pay very close attention to it, and they care about it, and they don't necessarily get it right. And again, you might walk into this organization and say, like, I don't like the corporate culture here. And like the examples you use, like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, don't have a good reputation for being pleasant to work for. Even Steve Jobs, even Jeff Bezos, they're not particularly pleasant to work for.
Yes.
But they have a very specific, they have very specific values that they say these are important for us. And what I've seen is that with the entrepreneurs that have kind of broken from the pack, and not all Endeavor entrepreneurs have managed to do that, but the ones that did paid attention to it, and the ones that are maybe didn't get as much, they're aware of it at least. Maybe they didn't.
They don't know how.
They didn't know how, or they didn't put as much resources, or didn't implement it as well. But my view is that they care about it, and more they are.
It is becoming a point of focus.
It's becoming a point of focus, and it's being pointed out to them that this is important. So whether it's in advisory boards that we have, or mentors,
think so? You've seen this?
I've seen this.
Okay.
I've seen so. Again, I can't give you names here, but there's one entrepreneur that was saying, look, it's really, really important for me to, I want to get a really strong CFO, et cetera. And so the feedback from the mentors was, okay, number one is that for your business, you need to actually prioritize getting a chief commercial officer, because you're still doing the sales and your business is at the scale where you need to have that person.
Right.
And then your second priority should be the CFO. And then, again, silly little thing, and the entrepreneur was like, yeah, but I'm having a really hard time finding the right people, and the right people they're expecting a lot more. And they asked the entrepreneur, what's your budget for the role? And the entrepreneur shared the budget, and it said, the type of people that you're looking for are not going to accept this compensation, so you need to increase the compensation you have since this is a very high priority that will unlock a lot of benefits for the business, and for you need to budget more for it, and you need to do it. You need to hire the right person. And even that mentor said, look, I'm happy to also do a last interview. If you have multiple candidates that you're thinking about, I'm happy to kind of give input as an outsider as well. But the feedback there was that you need to prioritize the people that you have to make sure that they fit the caliber and the mindset that you're looking for. You need to make sure that you do it the right way. And you can't expect somebody. I mean, a lot of these entrepreneurs, so random thoughts, but I think they will intersect, is that number one is that with a lot of these entrepreneurs, the people that join their business usually accept a cut in salary compared to working for large corporates.
100%.
Maybe they might accept.
I have many examples like this. Yes, so I agree.
For these people to accept it, and assuming that these people are very capable and really the right people for the role, there has to be a reason why somebody would take a 15, 20, 30% salary cut, because they have to manage their expenses. Some of it might be that they're getting, equity, stock options, etc. But even with that, it means that they believe in something that the entrepreneur is shooting for. It sounds academic, but they believe in the vision that the entrepreneur is shooting for, or they click.
Very real. I was having a workshop with a group of people with one of the organizations that I'm supporting, and one of the leaders from that organization, she was only 11 days in the organization. And I asked her, you were in really large corporates. What made you join this startup as a director of sales? And she said, believe it or not, I had a massive pay cut. I was really in my comfort zone. The only reason why is two. First, I wanted to get out of my comfort zone. Second, the owner, the founder, I believed in his message. I believed in his values, and I believed in his vision. She kept on mentioning vision like 10 times in that setting. Yeah. And that was for her. She said, that's it for me. Everything else is trivial.
Yeah. And I think the probably the part that, if somebody is interviewing to work with an entrepreneur, the only part that I would tell them to add on top of this is to meet the other people in the organization, at least, especially the people that their peers. So if he or she is reporting to the entrepreneur, to look at the peers, because you want to make sure that you get along with these peers and you click with them. Yeah. And usually these entrepreneurs that, if somebody like your friend joined the company that because of this alignment, usually the peers who are at the same level in the organization will usually be like that. And
will validate this.
If there's somebody who doesn't click, the better entrepreneurs will have an honest conversation with this person and will say, look, this is not a good fit. I met someone who was a senior person at Netflix. He was visiting from the US, and he was giving an example of somebody very senior in the company had recently left, and he said, the founder had a very open and honest conversation. He said, look, you've been great for the organization, but moving forward, you're not the right person for the role. And it's not it wasn't like you're out, we're pushing you out. It
wasn't dramatic.
It was not a very dramatic, it was a very honest, open conversation. And they had a big farewell party for the person. I'm sure they had a generous package to help the person exit, etc. So it doesn't have to be cutthroat, but the entrepreneurs that really manage to do that very well in terms of bringing in the right people and
letting go,
or I don't like the word letting go, because sometimes they don't want to go, but exiting the people that are not the right fit is a very important one, and a very difficult one for entrepreneurs that scale their business, because a very difficult thing is when the company is in the early stage. A lot of people were very important to get the company to stage 2. And sometimes they just can't scale with the company. And there's this sense of camaraderie and loyalty that they have to each other. And the entrepreneur has to make that difficult decision to say, look, you've been amazing for the business. I have to hire somebody who you're going to report to, or I have to replace you. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be, you're out, I don't care about you, leave.
It can't be, because what message are you sending to everybody else? This is clear. And that person, since he or she has been from the beginning, obviously they have their own loyal kind of followers or people who believe in them. And and I've known founders who actually give the title chief technologist or chief evangelist, just to kind of put them on the side. You know what, we'll ask you to join meetings, you have your salary, you have your stocks and everything else, but otherwise just stay there until you decide to leave on your own.
And so there's different ways to do it. There are some places they say, look, I'm doing you a disservice by keeping you in the organization and sidelining you. You should be, you're very capable. You should be able to do something else, and they can. But there's different approaches.
There are different ways.
But what's important is when you have a capability thing, and then you have a value alignment. The value alignment one is the one that 100%. Is very clear. Like every time the entrepreneur hesitates or delays this separation, they always regret it every single time.
Of course, because the repercussions then it's catastrophic, and to recoup from that is usually at the expense of the organization, in whole. And I think we have to end, because otherwise we're going to stay here forever. And I don't mind that, but I'm sure you have things to do. And the cameras will start, switching off one after the other. But it's a very, very insightful discussion, Noor. But there's one question that I need to make sure that I get out of the way. While I was researching you, your photos from 5 years ago or 3 years ago is dramatically different from your photos now. What happened?
So about 2 years ago, my wife and I decided, actually it was when the pandemic hit, we we kind of said that, look, with people staying at home and things changing, we knew that people will either move less and become a lot more out of shape, or it's an opportunity to use some of the free time that you have. So we decided to take our fitness very seriously. And a year ago, I started this transformation program where I'm working with a coach online, not as a personal trainer. We set a program that's integrated, and I've been taking my health very seriously. I mean, I just turned 49, so it's my last year of my 40s. And it's like, for me, it was something, as I see my kids growing, I want when they become in their prime, in their 20s, that I can physically stay up, be able to keep up with them, to play football with my son, to play with my daughter, and just for you.
I mean, one book I read many years ago is called the Longevity Paradox, I think, which is its tagline is how to die young at a very old age. And the thesis behind it, or let's say the key takeaway, is exactly what you mentioned. It's just exercise. You just exercise, eat healthy, and that's it. It's not rocket science. You're just doing it. But yeah, because when I saw the photos, I was like, oh, okay, is this the same person? Is it a different person? Because that's a completely different person. And well done.
I think I dropped about 20 kilos of just pure fat. And for me, it was just something that was on the back of my mind. It was bothering me the whole time as I was focusing on everything else. Apparently, the number one predictor of men getting out of shape is having a child, their first child. Because obviously, you have a lot less free time, etc. But for me, I mean, I'm not blaming my kids for it. But for me, I was quite athletic and in shape when I was younger.
Okay, so you had muscle memory.
And, yes. So I was very physically active, did a lot of exercise, and was in relatively good shape. But about 2 years ago, I set, actually at the beginning of 2023, my target was to be in better shape in my 40s than I was in my 20s, which I've achieved. And then it's unfinished business. So it's still, I have a path to go.
This is one of the goals that you never achieve. It's just a lifelong goal, which is staying healthy, staying fit.
But it's interesting because I started reading up a lot on health
and fitness,
and obviously I get a lot of guidance from my coach. And so the word longevity has become a very hot topic right now. Everybody wants to live longer, but I think it's less about living longer. It's about it's not the lifespan, it's health span. It's actually living a lot more better. And there are so many people that are trying to hack their way to it. But like you said, it's a very simple thing. You need to move more, exercise so that you build muscle. And then you just have to eat well, because the way that the world has evolved is historically, a long time ago, if you lived quote unquote a normal life, you had to move a lot, you had to do a lot of things, and the food options that you had were limited. So you'd have to be doing something different to be out of shape or to be
disease.
Or disease. Now you actually have to be intentional to be in good shape and good health, because 100%. It's very easy to be sedentary. It's very easy to eat very high calories. Temptations are there. So it's very easy. So if you live a quote unquote normal life, you will have less muscle mass. You will move less. You will not normally not age well.
So if I ask you to correlate very anecdotally between healthy people that are fit and the success of their entrepreneurs from your cohort, can you establish a correlation, or there's no clear pattern?
No, I don't think there's a pattern. I think the only pattern that I see is that the ones that decided to be healthy are very healthy, are exceptionally healthy.
No, I mean between their health and the success of their businesses. Like, do you see, like you said, people who are paying attention to corporate culture, to people, usually are the successful ones. And you can see this clearly. Do you see the same correlation with people paying attention to their health? That also, like, can you see someone who's not healthy, who's obese, but also successful? Can you see that?
I've seen some, I've seen some who are...
I would have expected that someone...
Not extreme situations, but I think it's just because they didn't prioritize it, because they either are prioritizing their business and their families, and this kind of falls lower.
Yeah.
But the ones that, Michael Lahyani, for example, from Property Finder, is an incredibly fit person. And you'd see him, you'd think he's 20 something years old, but that's because he's intentional about being healthy. So he makes time for it and he pays attention to it, etc. And there are a couple of other entrepreneurs that are quite healthy, but there are some that are less healthy. So, and when we say healthy, it's not necessarily that they're obese. That one of the issues when you're above 40 is this concept of sarcopenia, where if you lead a normal lifestyle, you will lose the equivalent of, I think, 1 to 2% of your muscle mass, of your body weight and muscle mass per year, which you'll have some people who are not obese, but their muscle mass is not, they're not particularly fit. But I wouldn't say there's like an extreme situation where somebody who's like extremely unhealthy and very successful.
That probably it's counterintuitive. You wouldn't find that. As you're asking me, I'm trying to think of all of the entrepreneurs, and I can't think of somebody who's like extremely unhealthy. And most of them are at least maintaining a certain level of fitness. Let's say I'm not talking about triathlons and bodybuilders and CrossFitters. No, just at least they pay attention to this, and they're mindful about their health, their sleep, their eating, their sort of.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I've seen in other markets outside of the UAE, some entrepreneurs who are very unhealthy and very unsuccessful. Very successful, but very unhealthy.
But those probably are at the outliers.
It's an outlier. But I think, it's just a matter of the entrepreneurs prioritizing it. And then they're really resourceful. So if they want to kind of fix it, I think the issue in this industry is that there's so much noise pollution that for somebody who wants to become healthy, you have to be picky about who you're getting, how to do it.
Yes.
Because if you go listen to influencers, you'll end up like,
absolutely,
don't eat oatmeal, or you'll end up like doing things that are just a total waste of time. And I have friends who keep hopping from one nutritionist to the other, right? They keep trying so many different types.
Keto, paleo, I don't know.
So many things. And I tell them, look, it's really, the formula is very simple. You just need to do it. Like you have this there's a plan, you can get guidance. Here are people that you can get guidance from, or if not, here's a book that you can read, or whatever it is. But the formula is very simple. You just have to do it, and you have to stick to it. You have to be consistent with it. Yes. And the problem is that, like, I see there's one person in particular that just keeps doing so many things, and over the past year they're in the same place or even worse than they were before, where like I keep, at one point I'm like, I don't want to be this annoying person, but the answer is in front of you. You're trying to find the different answer that's easier to implement. It's actually easier for you to just do it, and it doesn't have to be like super intense where you're doing like this Iron Man. You just have to be consistent about it and mindful. And
I keep on correlating it with focus on culture as well. Because focus on culture, it's easy, it's in front of you, but it's not as clear. It's easy, but it's not clear. So you have to make sure that you understand it. And it's because it's too complicated in the sense of, it's easy, but complicated. It's easy versus hard. It's complicated versus simple. So, and similarly with your weight, it's easy, but you just need to do it. And you need to pay attention to it.
And I see that with my kids. So my son is turning 13 and my daughter is 9 years old. And obviously, as much as we try to control it, but they consume some content on social media, and they keep coming. And obviously, they're subject to so much marketing, and I keep trying to educate them on, look, if you want to be the best gymnast or the best footballer, and you want to be in good shape, which as they grow, they're going to care a lot about it. A lot of it is just really with giving them feedback when they want to eat something, like, no, actually, this is something you can cut. So let's say it's like, oh no, but I don't want to eat just grilled chicken and this boring salad that you have. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. But if you are going to have a meal, you don't have to get, let's say, a burger with the extra cheese, with the French fries and the milkshake. You can remove it. And with my son, because he's very scientifically oriented, kind of break down for him in terms of how to think about it. And the idea is just for them to understand the complexity and then to see that, yes, I can do it. It's just not to get the wrong
Distracted
idea, not to
by
get distracted and to start going down, like eating protein bars or whatever it is. Tell them it's actually quite simple. You just have to be disciplined about it. And it's a very interesting journey, because it's, you know, a lot of the times, I guess the older you get, the more you see that life is about prioritizing things. And, you know, there's this really, really interesting book. It's called 4,000 Weeks, where basically the basic premise behind it, the writer is saying that the average person lives 4,000 weeks. When you put it in that context, you realize that, you know, your life is very finite. Yeah. So, and he says that the other thing, he says that a lot of people are trying to be very efficient. They're trying to do as much as possible. And he says, it actually would be better for you to decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, so that you can spend this finite time on the things that really matter the most, rather than trying to cram as much as possible. And for me, one of my realizations is that it's really about cutting out a lot of that clutter and a lot of that things that as a young person, you just want to do as much as possible, and just prioritizing things that are important. And health is so important, because, you know, let's say if you're an entrepreneur or somebody kind of building a business, obviously the financial rewards is something that you're shooting for, but, you know, how useful is that going to be for you, you know, when you're in your 70s and you can barely move and you can barely do anything.
Exactly. And you're spending it on the healthcare.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's something that a lot more people should be prioritizing.
Should be thinking about.
Should be thinking and should be prioritizing it. Not necessarily dropping everything for it, but it's surprising how few people prioritize it. And it's surprising how, well, it's not very surprising, but it's I don't know what the word to use is, but it's, I understand how it's very difficult to find the right information in the noise. But there are some resources that you can find certain people. There's some influencers or some biohackers that I think are doing more damage than being neutral. That anyway,
but no one is forcing anyone. No one is. I mean, even these influencers, let them be whatever they want to be. I mean, my philosophy, and I'm a very rational person. That's a problem that I have, and I know this. I'm very well aware of it. But my problem is when I see someone who's looking at those influencers or looking at those at the noise, and then I'm not saying that they're blaming it, because they're not, but they're finding it difficult navigating through this noise.
Yes,
it's all about hedonic philosophy, hedonic behavior. So you need to maximize your pleasure and minimize your pain. And that's not how life works.
No.
You need to minimize you need to make sure that you focus. And I love what you said, it's prioritization. And simply because when people say, I don't have time, no. Everybody has time. If someone like Elon Musk or a prince or a king or a governor has time to do it, then I can bet you that you have. It's just a matter of prioritization and making sure that you don't give in to temptations. And that's not easy.
Yeah.
That's
there's another book called The Comfort Crisis. And it's just because, and the main premise there is that because life has become so comfortable, your body basically adapts based on what you ask of it. So if you don't ask it to move, you don't ask it to do hard things, and you have this abundant supply of food, it's going to say, I don't need to work hard to survive. But if you give it kind of a physical assault in terms of exercise in different formats, it can be low intensity and high intensity, and you manage kind of the food that you eat, your body will say, okay, I need to adapt to the situation. That's, I think that's important. And like the two interesting sound bites. One of them was, I saw this image where it has this picture of this person split in half, and it says, pick your hard. On one hand, you have, like on the one half, it's a very fit, muscular guy who obviously his hard is to exercise frequently and eat well and to kind of let go of some of the hedonic things that are temptations. On the other side is an obese what that person would look like if he was obese. And this is the person that gave into the hedonic temptations, doesn't exercise, and his heart is, the being out of shape, and eventually the health impact that they'll have later on. So you just have to pick your heart. It's not whether you're going to do it or not. It's just you're either deciding I'm going to go here and I'm going to be physically healthy and etc. Or you can't control everything, or you're going to
end up on that route.
End up on the other route. The other one is just related to the influencers. I used to have, again, this relates to what we were talking about earlier. I used to have your mindset is that let everybody do whatever they want to say and then just everybody pick it. But I was on a run with my coach, and was a good friend. And he was telling me that we were kind of part of the conversation. We ran for an hour and a half. Part of the conversation, he was telling me that there is one, I can't remember his name, he has a lot of followers, an influencer who brought on his show a couple of these sketchy people who are kind of pushing these kind of very irresponsible or wrong health advice. And there's a lot of pushback from the health industry on that influencer that interviewed them, is that you have a lot of followers and you have a responsibility to vet the people that you bring on board. Because if you're going to put out these sound bites and put them there, people are following you because they trust you that you are vetting people the right way. And if you're interviewing these people, you at least should put the effort to do some research to qualify that, is this person, are the claims that the person making right or not?
Yes.
So, which I agree.
It's a school of thought that you might think of, and others would say, why don't the people who are listening also put that thought and research, and which is also, who made who an arbiter of knowledge and ideas and opinions, but I agree with you. With followership, with influence, you have a responsibility, 100%, and you need to be accountable. You need to be held accountable for what you say and what you do, and you need to put online, and especially in front of people, because people don't have the time to kind of critically think about everything everyone says.
They might not know how to do it.
And they might not know how to do it, exactly. They might not know the know-how, especially if it's outside of, I'm not in the medical industry. If some doctor said do this and do that, I don't know how to inspect that. And that's 100% true, and I agree with you.
There's one who's really great. His name is Lane Norton. I don't know if you... he's on social media. He has a PhD in exercise, I think in nutrition. And a lot of his content is to call out these influencers to say, this is a claim this person made, and he breaks it down, but it's not like I think you think. He says, well, here's the research.
Right.
Here's the research he quoted, and this is why it doesn't apply, because that person didn't tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, and here is research that shows that it's not true. So we don't have to kind of talk about examples, but
that's a very good way of looking at it.
I think it's important, because I think in the health industry, if you ask anybody, they tell you they want to be healthy.
Yes.
But the challenge that the average person has is, I guess, the realization that I made, which in retrospect is a very simple realization, is that you have to pick who you're taking the advice from. So, I'm not going to put as much weight on advice on, let's say, running a business from a 12-year-old, or someone who is, let's say, if in the context that we're talking about, if I'm running a business, a very large business, or let's say one of the entrepreneurs, they're going to put less weight on advice taken from somebody who is, let's say, who has been an employee in a large corporation, just simply because that person does not necessarily have the context that the entrepreneur has. They might be able to get 1 or 2 things from them, or whatever. In terms of running a business, you can't take advice from a chef. But if I'm going to take advice on cooking something, I will put more weight on advice from a trained chef, or somebody who's an accomplished chef or a cook, versus somebody who's never cooked in their life. It's a very similar thing in the healthcare industry. And unfortunately, a lot of the the influencers on social media are people who are just parroting some information that they have.
Because they're
and
after
it's just,
followership and after likes and
a lot of them have the right intentions. It's just that they themselves are not particularly qualified, or they might have just the wrong agenda. They just want to get followers, and they
yes.
whatever has the highest impact to get followers, they'll do. But it's on the person to say, okay, here are the people that I should take advice from.
100%.
And here's why. That's at least been my learning.